Welcome to another episode of Erasing Shame. And on this episode, I'm talking with Andrew Yang. Yes, Andrew Yang, but not the one you're thinking of that tried to run for president. This Andrew Yang has a background in finances, and he is working towards being a professional counselor and therapist. Andrew, thanks for making time to chat with me.
Hey, DJ, thanks for having me on the show. I love your show. I love how it's talking about mental health, specifically, for the Asian American community, and such an important topic. And so thanks for having me on.
Hey, thrilled to connect with you. And it is rare to find someone who is Asian American and male and willing to talk about mental health. So what got you into this topic?
Yeah, I just realized that I was not a happy person. And it took a long time, lots of years of self-reflection, a year of therapy, and a lot of work. I put in a lot of work, and when I did that, I realized that my life just started getting better, and and then I think another key aspect was just I love people. I love talking to them. I love empathizing with them, and it just And when I was in my mid-20s, I was thinking about, what kind of career should I pursue, and it just felt like therapy with the skills of listening and empathy. Those seemed to line up for me, and so that's kind of what sent me down the path of mental health.
Yeah, but at the same time, in Asian cultures, and I'm guessing you are Korean, is that right?
Yep, I'm Korean.
And then in many Asian cultures, therapy is not exactly a profession that is esteemed. So how did you navigate that conversation with your parents?
Yeah, so a little bit about my background actually is I actually got an MDiv in pastoral care and counseling, and my uncle's a pastor, and my mom's father, my grandfather, was actually also a pastor. And then when I got into seminary and I started studying scripture as well as the pastoral counseling aspect of it, that was the beginning stages of me getting really interested into mental health. And then from there, I just felt like I've kind of felt limited with the amount of I just kind of felt limited with what I was able to do, and how I was able to help people as a pastoral counselor. And so I thought it'd be better for me to get training and to continue my education. And so I started to I studied MA in counseling at Cal State Fullerton, which was an amazing experience. But, my parents have been pretty supportive throughout this whole process, which has been an incredible blessing. I think they were a little bit skeptical. I think they liked the fact that I was going down the path of becoming a pastor, because that was part of the family. It's part of our culture, our family heritage. My grandfather, my uncle being a pastor. So I think they were down with that. And I think the fact that it was pastoral care and counseling kind of softened the blow as I transitioned to study mental health for a longer duration of time.
Well, good. I'm glad you're on this path. And as you're getting more engaged and educated, what are you finding to be the biggest challenges or the misconceptions about mental health among Asian Americans?
Yeah, I feel like...
Of course, there are many, but what comes to top of mind,
I think one of the biggest barriers actually is helping Asian American individuals find their identity in terms of where they fit in the world. That was one of my biggest struggles, because when you come from an Asian American background, you're basically living in two worlds. You come from an individualistic world, or you live in an individualistic world, which is the U.S. Very much you take care of yourself. You only care for yourself. You're very much about being your own individual and becoming independent, right? But but your family, if they came from Asia, they come from a very collectivistic background, right? So it's all about, putting others first, think about the group, don't take any actions that might offend the group or hurt the group. And then, so I always felt growing up that there's such an intense conflict within me of conflicting values. Um, and I think coming to terms with which of those values you kind of align with the most, I think would help. And like when you come from a collectivistic background too, it's like shameful. It's shameful to admit that you need help, because then it might suggest that maybe your parents did something wrong, or so there's something wrong with the family unit. And I think that was another cultural pressure that I faced, where it kind of made it harder for me to seek help.
Mm-hmm. Well, here we are talking about erasing shame. And so uh, navigating two very different cultures is very much at the root of what makes it particularly challenging for Asian Americans and mental health and their identity formation and all that.
Yeah.
What have you found helpful in your personal life and in your training? I'm guessing the training is still lacking because there's not much training in the contextualized sense. So a lot of this we're still learning as we go and sharing what we've learned.
Yeah. Thankfully, there is more research being done around Asian American health, and I think that's great. But obviously, not as much. There's not as much literature out there as we would like there to be. What has helped me in discovering my identity has been, just coming to terms that I actually align more with a Western mindset than I would say Eastern mindset. I align more with like being with individualism than collectivism, and I think that was actually kind of hard to reconcile within the family dynamic, because I started setting boundaries. I started setting I moved out of my house, which was like a really difficult process in my mid-20s. And so kind of acknowledging, this is what I'm more comfortable with, and it aligns more with my values. Unfortunately, it comes in conflict with my parents and stuff. But, thankfully, through a lot of work, through a lot of conversation, through a lot of like love and empathy for each other, we've been able to, I feel like, come to a compromise. And we're still talking. We still compromise with one another. But I just feel really blessed and lucky that my parents are as understanding as they are.
Well, a lot of our listeners and viewers are very concrete thinkers. And so while you use words like empathy and conflict, could you share an example of where conflict can be a good thing?
Oh, yeah. I actually, a lot of people are scared of conflict. I'm scared of conflict. I was, right? Because it creates anger, a lot of intense emotion, and even like relationships can break. But
and just plain old discomfort.
Oh, yeah, totally. But what I realized is that conflict can actually be a great thing, because it's an opportunity for two people to really get to know each other. Right? And it's an opportunity for you to actually deepen the relationship with one another. Because when you come into conflict, you're basically saying, in order to resolve it, you have to say, this is where I'm coming from. You have to share your perspective, and it kind of places you in a vulnerable position, because now the other person has, I guess, they can reject you. They can say that's stupid. They can, really hurt you, right? But if you frame it in a good way, and if you approach it from a healthy perspective, then I feel like there's a lot of opportunity for you to deepen that relationship. And so what does that look like, right? So if I say, hey, look, this is where I'm coming from. When you did this, I felt hurt. Then if the other person responds in a way and he or she goes, well, I didn't know that. Now that I know that, I can, maybe I'll change my behavior so that it doesn't hurt you anymore, right? So what you just did was there was a lot of understanding, a lot of empathy, and that person was willing to compromise and do this to help you. And so you're building trust, right? You're building trust, and you're building, I think like love towards one another as you navigate that conflict together.
Now, how is that even possible when you're talking with your parents?
Because
that's the hardest one.
Oh, yeah. It's not easy. What I have found has helped me is when I get into conflict with them, emotions are high, right? And so what I do is I actually walk away. I let it go, and at a later time, I'll come back to them and I'll say, "Hey, look, this is what happened. This is how I felt," and we'll talk about their perspective. I'll share from my perspective, and it's not always going to be perfect. It's not always where we come to like an amazing understanding with each other, but I think just being willing to have that conversation and talking it out helps.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine because it's so hard to start that conversation because we've got so much emotional
Mhm.
discomfort
Mhm.
and we've got so much socialization in terms of just how we grew up and what the parents said is what goes. And to even ask a question seems to be disrespectful in the
Oh yeah,
Asian culture.
yeah,
And yet in the American culture where it's more egalitarian,
yeah,
it's a there's more room to raise an issue and talk about the issue without the emotional entanglement.
yeah.
And uh, man,
So okay,
go
so
ahead.
here's the thing. That's why it's so important to know like where your values are, right? Like for me, because I realized I come from a more Western background, this was something that I had to fight for in order for me to be happy. I think if you come from a more collectivistic background and you have those more, your values align more with those, this process might look a little different, right? Because then the disrespect that might be perceived from your parents is a lot bigger for you. It's a lot bigger value for you than it is than it is for you to bring it up and talk about it, right? So that's why it's hard to give like universal truths or advice to every person because it really depends on the context. Plus, um, not all parents are very understanding. Uh, you know, for me and my parents, like when their emotions get high, it's pretty bad. But thankfully, when I walk away and come back, I'm able to have like a reasonably calm discussion at times, right? That's not always the case with other parents as well, and so it's really really difficult to navigate this, and that's why I think therapy is so important because you need someone who knows you, who knows your context, who knows your situation to help guide you through this whole process.
Yeah, that's a great point that there's no universal advice that we could just dispense and you follow the recipe 1, 2, 3, and 4 and you get to come to this understanding, you come to this empathy and respect each other's boundary. And
Yeah.
um, yeah, it doesn't quite work that way. And in an ideal world, it would be great if we could have someone who was from an Asian background, whether Chinese or Korean or Japanese, be part of this conversation. Although even the concept of conversation is not really part of their culture and their worldview, and so it's as if both of us have to step outside of our own small
Yes.
world and to realize, hey, this is a global world, and we're trying to relate well cross culturally, even though we may be related biologically.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're spot on. I think having considering their context, where they grew up from, where they come from, it's important. And it gives you color into their actions. It gives you insight into like why they're doing some of the things that they're doing, right? And one of the things that has helped me was realizing, one, my parents are imperfect. They're fallible people, and so they're gonna make mistakes. So not everything they do is because they hate me or something, or like they're out to get me. It's just that they made a mistake. And the second thing is to understand their cultural worldview, and like the worldview that they grew up in is very, very different for me, right? Like, yeah, like my parents came from, like South Korea, and they didn't have like the best living conditions, and so they came to the U.S. And even when the U.S., they were grinding and struggling, and man, in order to like really build a life here in the U.S. as like an immigrant, you really gotta have a lot of grit. And my dad also lived through the LA riots, right? And so there's just a lot of intensive experiences that they had to go through that I don't, right? Like they did that in order so that I don't have to experience things like that. And and I feel so grateful for them, right? And so I think understanding that they come from a different context and a different life has helped me be more understanding of like why they act the way that they do sometimes.
Very good. And so, out of all your personal experiences and your professional experience that you're still building, how far along are you in becoming a professional counselor that can take clients?
Yeah, actually, so for me personally, I actually stepped away. I did two. I studied marriage and family therapy for 2 years, and then I actually stepped away from that world to step into the world of finance, into the world of Bitcoin, actually. And then so I've been doing that for the past year and a half, and so yeah. But what I am doing in order to further my exploration of mental health and to give back to the community and to still be involved with this world of to be involved with this movement is I'm going to be starting a mental health newsletter this coming Friday, May 1st, and in conjunction with Mental Health Awareness Month, and it's going to be talking about mental health, how to discover strength through mental health, and a lot of it is going to be coaching from some of the experiences that I've learned and some of the definitions that I studied while I was in counseling school and things like that. And so, I don't think I might go back to study MFT again and to become a counselor sometime later in my life. But right now, I'm not sure I see it within my foreseeable future.
Okay. Well, we live in this gig economy now, and the quarantine and the coronavirus is going to change the way we do life and the way we do work. And so perhaps there will be some kind of a new opportunity as you take care of the financial part and making a living that way, but also to provide real-time counseling of sorts, along with this newsletter. So tell us about this newsletter. I'm thrilled that we can talk about this during launch week. So it's almost like we're having an online launch party here on Erasing Shame. So we're very honored to be part of that.
So Heme publication is dedicated to just helping people explore strength and to discover their strength through mental health. And I want to change the narrative around shame, around the stigma around mental health, because I think if people took it more seriously, I think it would help them improve their lives significantly, right? And to be honest, like mental health is the starting point for everything, right? It's the starting point of the way that you view yourself. It's the starting point of like how you relate to other people. It's the starting point of productivity, right? So if you're coming from a bad spot in terms of mental health, it's so much harder to become productive and to finish the project that you want to do, to write that essay, to build a feature in your company, right? So that's why I think like by taking care of ourselves, by taking mental health seriously, we can explore and discover strength. By fighting, by resolving this, and we can figure out how we can thrive in our regular lives. Like heme, the name heme itself is actually a Korean word. It means strength, and and so I wanted to. That's why I named it Heme Publication, because I wanted to just really focus on strength through mental health.
Well, fantastic. That's a catchy tagline right there. Strength through mental health. And I think you hit some of the key words, and I think your work in the financial world will help to reframe that. It is about productivity. It is about effectiveness. Success, and having a better life. So those are all great things. It's not an illness to manage or to take care of or hide, but it is part of your success as a person and in your work. So that's beautiful.
Yeah.
How can people be a part of Heme publication? Is it you said it's a newsletter, so I guess people would subscribe by email?
Yeah, go to heme.substack.com, HEEM.substack.com, and I think you'll include it in the show notes as well. And so you can subscribe there. The first newsletter is coming out this Friday, and I'm really, really excited about it.
Well, we're releasing this episode in time for just that. So thrilled that we could shed a spotlight on what you're doing. Thank you for bringing together mental health and strength. And we wish you well, and drop us a line from time to time. Maybe in a couple months, we'll check back and see what kind of things are developing your way.
Yeah, I'd love to keep the conversation going. DJ, thank you so much for having me on.
Well, Andrew, thanks for being part of the Erasing Shame podcast. And we hope your name will become just as known as the other Andrew Yang. And for those of you that are watching and listening, thank you for staying with us on Erasing Shame. You can connect with us at erasingshame.com for the show notes. And we're on Facebook and YouTube, and subscribe on Apple Podcast, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else. We're ubiquitous now, thanks to Libsyn being our backend server. And add a review, add some stars so that others can benefit from what Andrew is doing and what we're doing here at Erasing Shame. Until next week, we see you. Bye-bye.